Fala pessoal, boa noite. Bom, hoje a gente está aqui numa quarta-feira animada de mercado, né? Super quarta, com várias decisões, mas também com vários outros temas que são super relevantes para o investidor brasileiro que está olhando a classe de criptoativos, especificamente Bitcoin. Então, hoje a gente trouxe um convidado super especial lá de Nova York e por isso a conversa vai ter que ser em inglês. Só antes da gente começar, por favor, lembrem que toda a parte de pergunta e resposta vocês podem mandar as perguntas lá no YouTube e a gente, ao final aqui da live, vai selecionar elas para trazer aqui na nossa discussão também. So, switching back to English, today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin, and we'll try to break down the latest headlines and what's next to expect on this market. So here to explore a little bit more about this universe and Bitcoin as an investment class, I'm pleased to have Paul Capelli, Portfolio Manager for Indexed Strategies for Galaxy Digital. Paul, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Guys, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here to talk a little bit about digital assets, in particular Bitcoin, and really what's been happening in the market for an asset that has really seen a turnaround so far this year, being up just over 60%.
Yeah, definitely. Paul, we both know how Galaxy works and operates, but it's a very well-known company in US. But as many of our audience here is Brazilian, so would you mind to take just a couple minutes to introduce Galaxy before we jump into this topic?
Yeah, sure. Galaxy was founded in late 2017 by famed macro investor Mike Novogratz, who still remains our CEO. He was an early adopter of not just Bitcoin, I think making his first purchase when Bitcoin was roughly around $100, but also an adopter of digital assets and making a number of investments throughout the space, really seeing what the vision was for kind of decentralized systems and kind of why we need to have a kind of a hedge on the existing financial system and the infrastructure that exists. So now we are a 400-person company. We're just over 5 years old. We exist here in New York, offices in Chicago, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong. So we're truly a global company. And the main premise for why Galaxy is here is to kind of bridge, the digital asset universe and the infrastructure that was built there, and bring it to institutional investors and make it simple and mainstream, and really put the wrapper on it that gives investors the framework that they have had and become accustomed to in so many other asset classes. We have what I would call three distinct business lines: asset management, where I sit, where we manage a variety of different products across venture, ETFs and passive products, and actively managed digital asset products in the liquid part of the space. We have a trading business that really spans capital markets, with our advisory business that combines to face clients that are transactional in the space and looking for a variety of different solutions in execution and prime brokerage and things like that you would see at a kind of a regular full services investment bank. And then we really have another area of the business that we would call infrastructure, where we do things that are truly unique to the digital asset space, where we're building on chain, we're providing wallets and custody services with our new purchase of a company called GK8, and then another business that's truly, unique, I would say, to digital assets, which is our mining franchise, which we just made an acquisition there as well of a company called Helios, where we can actually build out mining infrastructure to continue to support and secure this overall ecosystem. So, if you think about Galaxy overall, we are a global public digital investment bank. We we are based here in New York with employees all over the world to service clients across the digital asset ecosystem.
That's great. You guys definitely are expert on this market. So let's talk about Bitcoin, which is the main focus here. Bitcoin is definitely taking over the latest headlines, mainly because the most recent events and how the market was feeling in the latest financial crisis. So how is your take on Bitcoin on that, and how do you think Bitcoin can play a part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, just another reminder and another thing that we're seeing here. Bitcoin is once again having its moment, right? What we have seen throughout the lifespan of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin was really birthed originally out of the original, we call financial crisis back in 2008, the GFC, the global financial crisis, to really be a hedge on the overall inefficiencies in the infrastructure of both central banks and the existing financial system. It was founded pseudonymously by someone called Satoshi Nakamoto. And really what Bitcoin is designed to do is to really give you what I would call a call option, right, on the existing financial system, right? It is not controlled by any one person, organization, central bank, government, or individual, right? And it is truly designed to be a decentralized, kind of monetary system. And if you think about Bitcoin, right, it has a fixed supply. There will only ever be 21 million. It is deflationary by nature as the supply goes down, which I think we'll get into a little bit later in our discussion, right, via the halving process, right? And Bitcoin exists, right, in every country that the internet exists in. So it exists all over the world, and all a Bitcoin is worth the same no matter where you go in the world. And if you look at kind of what has happened now, right, Bitcoin is having its moment, I think, really for two reasons. One, based on some of the events that happened last year in crypto and digital assets, right, around kind of the collapse of the Luna ecosystem, what happened in the lending market with the collapse of companies like Genesis and Voyager and BlockFi and Celsius that were really big lenders in this space, right? That were really centralized companies that were inefficient, all the way to what we saw late last year with the collapse of a large company like FTX. Crypto was a little beaten down, right? Price action had moved lower, especially what was happening, in the macro universe, right? With rising rates and kind of a little bit of a reset from what we've seen of kind of a bubble bursting after having a global pandemic. And a lot of the investors that were paid to be patient, right, saw opportunity to buy Bitcoin at a materially lower price at the start of the year, right? We saw risk assets overall rebound a little bit. But as we have gotten to the year with higher rates, and we saw things kind of start to break, mainly in the U.S. Around the regional banking system, right? Once again, we've seen kind of banks being mismanaged, the infrastructure's beginning to collapse a little bit, right? And that has, furthered what we're seeing for the overall use case for Bitcoin, right? So investors now are gravitating to Bitcoin, which really is, decoupling from other risk assets and other things. And it's showing that it has a real utility, right? As a, lack of a better term, a hedge on the overall current system, right? So, if you think about what we've seen, right, it was attractive earlier this year because of where it was from a price standpoint, right? And investors wanted to begin broadening their allocation to Bitcoin and kind of the overall digital asset ecosystem. But now Bitcoin specifically, right, is having its moment, right, as a hedge or an in-the-money call option, right, on the current financial system and the policies and different things that exist there, right? So we're now seeing, further increase and appreciation of price. But really what that means is we're having a further increase of adoption, right, of Bitcoin, of digital assets, of the overall ecosystem. So, what we're seeing now is people start to truly understand the value proposition of holding Bitcoin in a portfolio amidst all the turmoil that we're seeing right now.
Great. So Bitcoin's having its moment. And what I got from some takeaways from what you said is that since Bitcoin works in some inefficiency of the market, this is a good time for Bitcoin. But as you already mentioned, Bitcoin's already 60% up this year. So how do you see Bitcoin at this price point? Is there more space to go?
Yeah, well, let me first say that, here at Galaxy and me personally in general, we're not necessarily the business of making long-term or making price predictions, right, to a number. But if you think of all the things that have happened, right, since the start of 2022, right, where we've seen rates increase, right, from the Fed here in the US, we've seen some idiosyncratic things happen within the digital asset market itself that put a lot of pressure on price and the overall ecosystem. And now we're seeing yet, the early stages, I would say, of yet another banking crisis. And it's put the Fed, again, at a pivotal point, right, about how much further should they increase rates? Should they cut rates? Are we going to see more things break, or are we going to see more regional banks here in the U.S. and larger banks, right, like Credit Suisse, have issues globally, right? It seems that even though Bitcoin has had such an increase so far this year, right, adoption continues to increase, right? What we're seeing here is, buyers have been outnumbering sellers roughly 65% to 35%, right, in favor of Bitcoin. What we're seeing is people continually question and become concerned about the management and the approach of many of these firms. We're seeing that the concepts and ideas of having hold to maturity securities on your balance sheet in a rising rate environment be untenable. All of these things are starting to come together. And what everyone's starting to realize is Bitcoin is an asset that you should have in your portfolio that not only hedges out that risk a little bit, but it also is a potential opportunity for growth, right? As Bitcoin volatility has actually gone down over this entire period of time. So while I would say that, Bitcoin price has obviously increased pretty substantially so far this year, and we're only in March, we are certainly in a scenario where it looks like Bitcoin adoption will continue to increase, and we're starting to see more and more investors really want to understand, I guess, what the value of Bitcoin is, and why this adoption is happening. And because of all the work they have done over these, last couple of years, waiting for an opportunity, they're now taking that opportunity to make it part of their investment portfolio and part of their asset allocation. And there's really nothing that's happening right now as to why that should stop and why we expect that to decrease.
Great. And how do you think the fourth halving that is about to come in the next year will play a role on this Bitcoin journey?
Yeah, Kaike, you brought up an interesting term, right? Halving, right? So, one of the things that makes Bitcoin unique is that we understand its supply, which will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. But we also understand its issuance schedule, right? And there was, when Bitcoin was invented, one of the smart things that Satoshi Nakamoto did, which was either a person or multiple people or a group that kind of came up with this idea that no one really knows of at this point, which makes it Bitcoin such a unique invention, is the fact that it made it deflationary, right? So what does that mean? What does the halving mean, right? So it means that every 4 years, Bitcoin issuance, right? Bitcoin are issued on a block schedule every 10 minutes, right? So prior to May of 2020, right? So from May of roughly 2016 to May of 2020, we saw 12.5 Bitcoin issued every 10 minutes per block, right? And then in May of 2020, because of the code that was written into Bitcoin, we saw a halving, right? So currently, what we are seeing is Bitcoin now issued at 6.25 Bitcoin per block. And what will happen in May of 2024, right, which we're almost coming up on in a year, is we'll see 3.125, 3.125 Bitcoin issued per block. And that keeps Bitcoin on a deflationary schedule in what is largely globally an inflationary environment, right? So that is another reason why Bitcoin, we believe, is a valuable asset, right? Because we think that inflation over time is a global phenomenon. It continues to happen at different rates in many different countries and parts of the world, right? But Bitcoin's deflation schedule is keeps it at a deflationary rate of like a little bit less than 2%, right? So what we will see, roughly a year from now, is the Bitcoin halving will happen, right? We'll go from 6.25 Bitcoin to 3.125 Bitcoin, which means that less Bitcoin will be issued, and this halving will continue to happen every 4 years until there's 21 million Bitcoin mined, and that's going to take over 100 years from now to actually happen, to have the full 21 million mined.
Nice, very interesting dynamic on it. But Paul, as during our conversation here, it pops up lots of different topics that is related to Bitcoin, but with different natures. So every time that we're thinking Bitcoin, we're definitely thinking about new emerging technology, or we're thinking about growth, or mainly we're thinking about a new piece of the financial system. So there's so many ways to see it, so many perspectives. And if we sum all of that, how do we see Bitcoin as an asset class? I mean, on an investor's perspective, how can we sum that and understand the role of Bitcoin on portfolio construction?
Yeah, that's really a great question, right? If you think about, Bitcoin holistically, right? Bitcoin was the first, digital asset, right? The underlying technology that underpins Bitcoin is blockchain technology, right? So Bitcoin is one, as I mentioned, truly decentralized. It has a truly public and immutable ledger, right? Where you can see every Bitcoin transaction that has ever happened and will ever happen going on in the future. And Bitcoin is not controlled by anyone, right? So, what controls Bitcoin is the network of miners that exist globally that approve transactions and issue new Bitcoin. But when you think of Bitcoin, really, how should you think about it? Well, you have to think about it in a few different ways, right? Is it necessarily a transactional currency? No, but it is a bit of a store of value. It can be a means of exchange. Its volatility is obviously going down, and it's that has been part of the value prop as volatility goes down and liquidity increases. And when you think about Bitcoin overall and what it can represent in your portfolio, the easiest way to think about Bitcoin is really as a commodity, right? And something that can be exchanged globally as a deflationary store of value. A lot of people liken it to digital gold, right? And it's kind of a new way to hedge your portfolio against current financial conditions. And if you look at Bitcoin over time, it's also an uncorrelated asset, right? There was obviously a lot of correlation to traditional assets over the last couple of years. That's really due to the fact that we just saw so much liquidity being pumped into the system across all assets that everything went up, right? And last year, we were going through a bit of a bubble burst and it went down. But if you look at what's happening right now across really the financial ecosystem, right? Bitcoin is really decoupling itself, right? So now you have this commodity that can be exchanged for the same value anywhere all over the world. It's deflationary. It's underpinned by a new technology, right? In blockchain technology, and its value is that it's worth the same everywhere in the world, and it's certainly in a growth phase, right? And it has a fixed supply. So when you kind of string this all together, right? Even though Bitcoin's price is at roughly 27, 28,000 today, really it doesn't exist in so many portfolios out there, right? So there's still a lot of capital that has yet to allocate itself to Bitcoin, but we are seeing that growth happen, and we believe that growth will continue. So that really should be an overall positive for Bitcoin, and we think it's going to continue to show up in more portfolios globally, especially from a macro perspective.
Yeah, great. Heading towards the end here, I noticed that you mentioned a lot of times that the volatility of Bitcoin was decreasing along the way. And this is very important because this was keeping most of the investors a part of this asset class. So I do think this is a very important sign for investors in overall. But I was kept thinking here, if the institutional adoption of investing in Bitcoin, which was more recently done, if this has any connection with the volatility going down.
Yeah, I think a few things have to do with the volatility of Bitcoin coming down, right? Certainly, what we are seeing in terms of adoption overall is Bitcoin, one, as I mentioned earlier, it exists in every country now that the internet exists in, right? So it's a truly global asset. It exists in the portfolios of every level of investor, from retail to high net worth to all kinds of institutions, right? Endowments, pensions, foundations, right? There's even some central banks out there that are rumored to have Bitcoin in their portfolio, right? And what we see, even though Bitcoin is a highly liquid asset, right, is trading somewhere between 20 and 50 billion a day in a 24-hour span, is that due to Bitcoin's limited supply and its high level of adoption that we're seeing right now, the velocity at which Bitcoin is trading in terms of its volatility is people are buying Bitcoin and they're holding on to it. They're keeping it as an asset allocation in their portfolio for a lot of the reasons that I've mentioned previously, right? Where they want it as a kind of a hedge on the current system. They want it because of the fixed supply. They want it because they view it as a competitor to gold. They view it as a means of exchange from a global perspective, right? So you have all these things. People are worried about trying to find a hard deflationary asset in an inflationary world, right? All of those things are contributing to the fact that Bitcoin adoption is increasing, right? But the volatility around which its price is fluctuating, or the speed its price is fluctuating, is decreasing now over time. Now, do I expect Bitcoin to still have its volatile periods? Absolutely. But Bitcoin dominance has increased recently, and the amount of volatility continues to go down over time. And again, as price continues to increase and adoption continues to increase, we believe, right, that volatility will continue to decrease.
Great. That was a very good explanation on it. Thank you. And going through these questions people were sending us here, I know we've mentioned that already, the relation between this financial crisis with Bitcoin, but if you can go in a little bit more detail on it, that'll be great because there are people asking here.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I think, as I mentioned, right, Bitcoin was founded, right, on the fact that there is so much distrust in centralized systems and the banking system overall, right? And no matter what you look at over time, right, whether it is kind of the savings and loan crisis, right, what happened around long-term capital in the late 90s, just a few years later, what we saw with the dot-com bubble busting, the global financial crisis, what we saw in 2008 and 2009. And now really what we're seeing here with this regional bank crisis, or what we're seeing with Credit Suisse, is the fact that people do not trust these centralized systems to do the right thing and be managed the same way. And the simple fact of the matter is, when you look at Bitcoin, right, no matter what happens, Bitcoin works the same exact way in every economic environment, right? Bitcoin continues to produce one block every 10 minutes on the exact same schedule it was designed to from day one, and it will continue to do that until it reaches 21 million, right? So if you think about what happens in a lot of these places, no matter what policies are put in, no matter what is, what safeguards or compliance or what rails are designed to be put in place, right? There always seems to be a failure, right? Somewhere along the way that kind of sets us back and leads us to have one, distrust in the system, and two, really an understanding that the fixes that exist usually only last for a very short period of time, right? This is really, 10, 12 years later, we're seeing, again, more mismanagement kind of in the financial sector, right? So that, again, makes Bitcoin's value prop as a decentralized asset, commodity, whatever you want to call it, right? In a world that continues to, continue to have problems, Bitcoin's consistency is also another thing that gives it value, right? So if we look kind of across the spectrum of what we're seeing here, we once again look like we're kind of on the precipice of another kind of major disaster that continues to kind of make people weary of kind of these centralized systems. Where at the end of the day, Bitcoin is built on a blockchain. It is decentralized. It is forged in code, right? And we have a full understanding of exactly how it's going to work. And we can't always say that about the banking system. So I think that is just another thing to keep in mind, that Bitcoin was, kind of born out of distrust for the system, right? And now it continues to be one of the solutions for that distrust.
Absolutely. So many interesting topics that you just brought up. Many thanks. And Paul, just heading towards the end here, there is another question relating to our ETF, so I'll take that one. But before I just take it, it was such a pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any thoughts you just want to share here, please feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the main takeaway here is, Galaxy was founded to be an institutional company around this asset class, right? And, that's one of the main reasons that we paired up with Itaú, right? To bring institutional adoption, right, to this asset class, to Bitcoin, right? Because we believe in not only the digital asset ecosystem and a digital future, but we want investors to be able to come and buy products that give you safe exposure, that you don't have to worry about, that allow you to take advantage of being exposed to this asset class. And I think that, having these two firms kind of co-sign and kind of underwrite, Bitcoin is a real, promising, way forward for investors to get exposure to this asset class.
Great. We're definitely very happy with this partnership that we're building. It's so important for us to have your support on it. Um, so I'll take from here because I'll just answer the last question that we got here related to Bitcoin. So Paul, many thanks for your participation here with us.
Anytime.
Voltando aqui para português, turma, tem pergunta aqui do Tomás Coronha Rubscher perguntando se a gente tem ETF de Bitcoin. A gente tem o BIT11, ele é um ETF que é 100%, tem um lastro de 100% de Bitcoin. Inclusive, esse ETF é feito em parceria com a própria Galaxy. Então, eles fazem toda essa ponte para a gente de traduzir o que é o dinheiro, porque você coloca o dinheiro no ETF, e eles fazem o investimento direto no Bitcoin. Então, é o ETF que te dá acesso ao Bitcoin em dólar, só que com várias vantagens que são super relevantes aqui, tá? Primeiro que você está no ambiente regulado, o ETF, ele existe dentro desse ambiente que ele é regulado, que tem transferência de riqueza no ponto de vista de que você, se tiver algum herdeiro e precisar passar, você não fica à mercê da comunicação entre um e outro sobre wallet, senhas e tudo mais, além de toda uma infraestrutura que a Galaxy fez aqui em parceria com a gente, provendo as melhores práticas aqui de segurança, né, inclusive cibernética, mas também do ponto de vista de custódia, do relacionamento com traders, que a gente busca investir só, fazer execução só em mercado de balcão, o que para esse mundo, né, de cripto é super relevante, porque você acaba fugindo ali das exchanges, que é um ambiente onde costuma aparecer uma série de problemas. Então, no final do dia, é uma solução para quem quer investir em Bitcoin e dormir tranquilo à noite, sabendo que o Itaú está fazendo todo o dever de casa aqui, seja do ponto de vista de oferecer 100% dessa estrutura, uma estrutura de custo enxuta e, principalmente, segurança quando investir em Bitcoin. Então, o Bit ele vem para solucionar todas essas questões de quem gosta do tema, mas que tem algum receio da própria dinâmica do mercado. Acho que é isso. Muito obrigado, gente, pela participação hoje. Obrigado pelas perguntas. A gente tem hoje no nosso blog da Itaú Asset uma recorrência de conteúdos, em geral mensais, mas sempre que tem novidade a gente coloca lá também sobre o mercado de criptomoedas, que é um conteúdo que a gente também faz parceria com a Galaxy. Então, a gente fez essa live, mas a gente está sempre ali alimentando, porque a gente entende que investir bem é investir com informação. Então, a gente está aqui para ser essa ponte, tá? Entre vocês e informação desse mercado. Muito obrigado pela live hoje, gente. Até a próxima.